next, I'd like to turn it over to Pat Shipe and Dr. McWilliams-Woods to talk about the next phase of our work.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Dr. James and Mr. Bravo. It is great being here tonight. Once again, talking about our instructional models as we're moving forward. We're now at the place where we're sharing this next wave of heading into our second 9 weeks. That starts on November 11th. So we've been looking at that week of November 9th. Tonight, before we talk about the actual reopening plans and hear from the superintendent on his formal proposal, we thought it was really important to look at 2 data pieces. You know, as you've heard from Ms. Shipe and from me and from many of my staff, we always are trying to look at the data to help inform decisions, not just COVID data, but also at some of the academic data. And then we will look at some survey data that we had promised you that we would provide tonight. So first of all, looking at this is all October progress data, and looking at how we're doing across 3 key areas at our level of engagement and attendance. We'll look at some preliminary reading data and some math data. So this first slide captures our attendance engagement and our basic connectivity. Connectivity, not the digital kind, but are we connecting with students on a regular basis so that they can keep engaging with their schoolwork? We broke this down by weekly data, and most of our data that we get from our analytics tools are weekly snapshots. So that's why this is data by week. So when we looked at comparing from last spring, from that March to May, which we call our emergency remote, you know, that was more quickly making that flip. And the model that we're doing right now is obviously very different, where students are connecting into their classes and into their teachers using the video conferencing every day. So when we look just at students logging into their Chromebooks, everyone knows we're one-to-one preschool through 12th grade. Last spring we were at 90%. Now we're at 99.1% of our students. We see that activity of them logging into their Chromebooks every single week. Then when you start drilling down, well, what are they doing when they log in? The Google Meets is probably the most important in terms of them connecting into their lessons. We didn't require Google Meets for every lesson last spring, so we had 34% was the average weekly data during that time frame. And now this, for this first 9 weeks, a little shy of 9 weeks now, we're at 90%. Which means during the week, 90% of the students are connecting into their Google Meets. That doesn't necessarily mean every single one, but that means we're seeing students connecting into their Google Meets. And then students logging into their Google Classroom, our learning management system where all of the lessons and assignments and all of the grading happens. Last spring, it was 69%. This fall, it's 91.3%. And our attendance, the daily average, when we track the daily attendance, we're right at, typically we're right around that 93%. So we're not too far off of our typical average for our attendance. So just in terms of when we step back and look at our overall attendance, engagement, connectivity, it's very strong in terms of the student engagement in their lessons. And our ability to see that connection, especially into the Google Meets, the Google Classroom, and especially reflected through that attendance. I can tell you that this is not just because that we're lucky that this is happening. This is because of the incredible work that our teachers are doing and our connectors and our counselors and all of our support staff in making sure that students are being successful and those relationships with the families that are being formed. And it's also because families have set up those schedules that we talked about at the beginning of the year and are supporting. You know, we know lots of families are spending and figuring out those ways to make sure that their learning environment is strong, either at home or in a daycare or at the Boys and Girls Club, wherever the students are during the day. When we look specifically, drill down to our connectors, which is, you know, you've heard the award that Carla Chapman had, who started this program. It is a hallmark to that success of that engagement compared, and I spend, you know, every day of my life, I'm spending talking to chief academic officers all over the state and to some degree all over the country. So this really is something that we are known for, that is unique, the formal way that we're connecting with our students. Right now we have 300 trained connectors. We have, it's 924 students have been through that formal referral process and assignment to the connectors. And then we also, through Dan Rambler's Office in Student Services, we also can send the connectors, and the principals and counselors can ask for student services to send a staff member out to the home. And last year, all of last year, we did 2,000 wellness checks and home visits from that same office. And this year they've already done 700 so far, just at this beginning of the school year. Now getting into some of the academic data, and this is such critical, important data. Some of you have even said this in board meetings in the past about that early reading. We do something called oral reading records, where teachers individually assess students, teachers in grades K through 5, and the data that you're seeing here is for grades 1 through 5, because it's comparing last year to this year. For grades 1 through 5, our teachers individually conference with students and assess their reading. Now, obviously, a year ago, from March 2019 to October, that was face-to-face, and now it's a remote administration this October, but it's doing it remotely, but it's still individual from our teaching staff to the student. So this is pretty reliable data, even though the environment is a little bit different, and we obviously have to take that into consideration. We look at reading levels, and our expectation is obviously that students keep improving their reading level over time. When you look at students moving up at least one reading level, back in 2019 from March in the spring to October, so that includes any kind of summer slide in there, we had 66% of our students moving up at least one reading level. When we look at the same time frame, March 2020, last spring, now that was right before we went out for the pandemic, so obviously that's important to note. To October, we just did the assessments now, we see 34% students moving up at least one grade level, or one reading level, not grade level, but one reading level. So obviously that isn't it's not the same pace as we've seen previously, knowing that the conditions, if you think of what happened last spring, March through June, which was more of that emergency kind of remote that we did, and not quite the same face-to-face site-based during the summertime for all of the students who were struggling readers as well. We did do some remote summer school though, which was very successful. Then students staying at the same level, it was 32% previously and 54% this past March to October. And then students dropping at least one reading level. Obviously, we never want to see that. 2% in 2019 and 12% now. We do these regularly, these types of assessments through the year. I've told my staff that we don't want to panic about this because of all the different conditions that were happening in last spring. and through the summer till now. But obviously, we want to pay attention to this and dig deeply and make sure that we have the supports in place to support students so that we get everybody kind of back on that progress and that trajectory. We do another type of reading assessment called iReady. This is very different. It's not a face-to-face with the teacher. This one is individually administered. Students do this even if they're face-to-face in a school. They're by themselves at a computer and they're taking the assessment on their own, and then it gives them a pathway of work that they do based on that assessment. So this is all computerized. And so they could do this at home then individually, take the same assessments. When you look across reading and math, it's pretty consistent data from September 2019 to October of this year. We don't see big increases, we don't see drops, so the consistency. Now the administration was a little bit different, sitting in a classroom versus sitting at home independently doing it. But this is more promising data to say that's good for this assessment. We're not seeing any kind of drop-offs based on this grades K through 5. And then for middle school, we do a similar assessment in math, which is individually, students do at their computer. This is for grades 6 through 8. Same thing, this isn't percentage of students on level, this is percentiles. So we're looking at a little bit different data, but the story with this chart is, again, we're not seeing a big drop off from where students were last fall in 2019 to this fall in 2020. The last data piece is our interim progress reports. Now, these are not our final marking period grades for the first 9 weeks. Those just closed, and we won't have the data for another week to be able to share with you. But this is interim, so midway through this first 9-week period, teachers gave parents an interim progress report saying, here's where we are midway through this first marking period. On the left-hand side is 2019 and 20, showing the number of grades and the percentage of grades. So for example, in 2019-20, during the same interim progress marking period, we had 24% A's administered at that point and given or earned at that point. And then on the flip side, we had 7.8% of F's during that first interim progress report. And then when you look at where we are now, we're seeing a drop in the A's, 17.9% for the A's, and 12% an increase in the number of F's. So again, we're not going to panic with this, but it was a concern that we needed to look at to say, how can we provide support? This fall was a shorter time period, which certainly plays into the comparison between last fall or 2019 first interim compared to now. It was a much shorter time period, but we still want to make sure that this pattern doesn't continue going into this end of the marking period and into the second marking period. So that's just sort of the data overview. So you can see there's good news on the engagement. There's some concerns for reading, but some data that's showing that the students are doing okay and consistent with years in the past. And then our grades, we want to make sure that we address any of those students who are struggling so that they can get back on track. Just as a reminder, the survey results, we want to share both the family survey results again, just so you remember where they were, and then we're going to share the staff results. So we shared this last time that we had 60% of our families say that they would like to have the blended option, and 40%, 100% remote. So 40% said they'd like to stay remote as we are now. And then looking at grade level for families, there were more in the younger grades wanting a return. It was 71% was the highest in kindergarten. And then you can see just visually how it sort of drops down to high school. It wasn't as high percentage wanting the blended option versus the remote. Now I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Scheit to talk about the staff survey results.
Good evening, everybody. So we did the staff survey. AEA conducted a survey, and we had over 1,500 returns on that. So just some of the highlights of that survey. Educators were asked just of the 3 models presented at the time of the survey. That would be 100% remote, the blended model, and the bring everybody back model. Going into the second 9 weeks, where would they like to land? And 69% or almost 70% of our educators believe that they'd like to stay with a 100% remote model. They do want to have some way of delivering some interventions and some enrichments to our students, and I think we'll get into that a bit later. But over in the blended model side of that chart, 31% were not the total blended. We had 18% that wished to stay blended or go with a blended model, and then 12% that wanted to bring everybody back, that were willing to do that. I will say that one of the biggest issues with our educators wanting to stay 100% remote was their concern that the blended model decreased direct instructional time from 5 days a week with a 100% remote model to 2 days a week with a blended model. In addition to that, they really felt that our level of rigor from March, when we had to shut down overnight, to what we're doing as a remote model now was head and shoulders above what we've done. And that includes a summer full of professional development and training and additional, and they were very appreciative of delaying the start of students this school year for 2 weeks while they continued to have planning time, collaboration time, and professional development time. And Dr. McWilliams-Woods, if you'd like to do the principals and support staff. You're muted, Ellen.
There we go. At the same time, we surveyed our principals and deans so that we could see their results as well and get their feedback, which was vital. And it was obviously very similar, 69% wanting the 100% remote, 31%. We just asked, do you want the 100% remote or the blended? We didn't talk about the 5 days site-based, the whole 5 days a week at that point. So it's very similar. We also surveyed our support staff, our school-based support staff, which is our custodians, our secretaries, child nutrition, folks that work in the school but support the teachers. And, not too far different, 72% said stay 100% remote, 29% blended. The major themes, just to piggyback what Ms. Scheit said about the educators, the teacher feedback, the major themes were the concern going to blended, and to the blended model that we proposed last time was that loss of instruction from 5 days of instruction to 2 days of direct instruction plus 2 days self-directed remote and 1 day facilitated remote. The concern was that thing that everyone had just gotten into all of this rhythm and the schedule, and things were moving along well. They were seeing the students. Obviously, you saw the engagement data, and to all of a sudden go back from 5 days to 2 days direct instruction was a huge concern. The second was not wanting to disrupt instruction and the relationships that were formed, because to go to the blended model as we proposed last time, we were going to have to change teachers and students and reshuffle class lists. Primarily because if you think that 40% of our families were going to stay remote, we were going to have to dedicate teachers to those 100% remote families and move those teachers to remote. And then 60% of our families were going to come blended, and we'd have to dedicate teachers just for blended. And because of that reshuffling, we were going to have to redo class lists and teacher assignments to make that work. That was a huge concern. The best thing about our educators, and this, we also saw this in the family survey for those who didn't choose the blended model, was that they want anything to just make sure they have the same teacher. They didn't want to change the teachers. Same thing from our teachers and our principals. Their big concern was making that change, because once they've established that relationship, it's hard to make that change, even 8 weeks and 9 weeks into school.
Even if I could just underscore there,
Yeah.
even, and I had not talked about the second point, but even the concern also was just with the blended model, the requirement to go to cohorts because of social distancing would even separate classes within a building on site. And our educators and families are very protective of those relationships that they've built. So that was a huge concern.
And then the last item talked about was the increasing COVID-19 data that we all have talked about in the board meetings. So that's our progress data and our survey data. We'd like to just turn it over to the superintendent to talk about his formal proposal to you, to the board, and then we'll come back to actually talk about this reopening.
Right. So, we've gone through a lot of information, and we've been through a journey over almost nearly the last 9 weeks as we approached, our return to school fully remote. We do know that many more of our counties in Ohio are in level 3 or the red level. There's some concerns from the governor that some counties may actually go to purple this week, potentially, including Cuyahoga County. So as I look at, all of the particulars, what concerns me is some of the retrenchment that some of our students have made, and then many of the emails and comments that parents have sent. And so my approach and recommendation is that we really try to target moving forward our kids that are struggling. It does not mean a return to a blended model as we proposed in the past, but it's kind of looking at a remote plan with maybe a couple of targeted interventions. So looking at students who are actually struggling, who may be failing, looking at some of our high needs students who have special needs, and then looking at our high school seniors particularly, that we need to make sure we can keep them on track to graduate, and also those high school seniors who are trying to earn their credentials, which is a path to graduation, to make sure they can have some time in the building. So that's one of the reasons we wanted to show some of the procedures that we've developed in terms of bringing students into school, because what we're going to propose is that let our teachers determine which of their students, through their teacher teams that we have at every building, determine, the high need students and getting those students some face time at the building, but it won't be, the entire district going to this blended model. I would say this is more of a first step moving towards something that's going to change by the time we get through our second 9-week period. But we want to really focus on, I think, our students who are really struggling. So I know it's been called a lot of different names or acronyms. The one that, stuck with me was like kind of remote plus, but I like, Dr. McWilliams to continue and just dive deep into that concept of, keeping our students remote, but for small groups of students that we've identified need some kind of extra and in-person help to be able to provide that and do it in a safe manner. Because listen, in our district, we have had, and we've been remote, all right? So we've had approximately 19 student cases of COVID, confirmed and suspected. 9 are active, and we had actually 17 staff members total, and 10 are currently active. And that is not even with school being in session. And we are actually, we should have posted this. I got a letter today, I think all the districts in Summit County from Summit County Public Health that we're going to be getting out to each of our families, but we put it on our website, or it should be there shortly. Talking about some of the things that we need to do just as Summit County citizens. And it doesn't matter whether you're a school age citizen or, a post high school, whether you're in college or you're a parent or other adult in the community. In order to beat this thing, we have to make sure that we're doing the appropriate thing, like wearing masks in public, making sure we're having our masks on in the store, limiting our interactions with other people. And I know it's difficult, with, we have holidays coming up and things like that. We have to really do, I think, a better job. And some of the issues that have happened in school, while they may have happened with athletics, from the information we have, those initial infections that caused the problem with some of our teams or some of our schools have actually been related to activities that have been outside of school. But when that person came in close contact with someone in the school and that person got, an infection, then of course we have to shut down certain activities, whether it's a whole team or whether we have to send staff home from a whole entire building, to isolate until we get the contact tracing done and a clean bill of health from Summit County Public Health. Those are things that I think are going to cause a lot of disruptions to our school if we were in person. And so I'll turn it over to Dr. McWilliams-Woods to walk us through the reopening and this second 9-week period.
So we wanted to make sure you knew that this was the same teams that have been working diligently since the end of last year. We actually started convening right towards the end of last year and then all through the summer. And we've shown this slide, but this doesn't, at some point when we get to the other side of all this, we're going to have the team members come and join a board meeting. Because the work that they've done and the thousands of hours that they've spent through the different reopening models that we've done has been absolutely incredible. Ms. Shipe?
I want to underscore that. I know that the board members have heard from many, many, many teachers and administrators, but both Dr. McWilliams-Woods and I, we really want to say that the hundreds of teachers and administrators that participated in these committees with thousands of man hours. 2 things. I have not attended a meeting yet that they have not been putting the best interest of the students and families first. And how can we make this work? And secondly, working tirelessly. That's the first thing that comes up. What about my students? What can we do? So I really want to publicly recognize these teams who will continue the work as we go. They're very aware and continually talk about those students that are not where they would like them to be. We just went to a number of meetings this past week, and they all had stories about, I'm really happy how this remote is going. Most of my students are doing really well and thriving, but I do have one or two that I really would like to find a way to give them some support. So that's what these teams have been charged with, coming up with some kind of remote model, and that's what the superintendent just talked about. I also seem to be referring to it as a remote plus, where it's a remote model, but providing site-based supports, interventions, or enrichments for those students that are the most at risk or that are struggling the most. So we've added the one model now tonight to the other models that we've already presented, and that is that second model listed there, the 100% remote with site-based supports model. Dr. McWilliams-Woods, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think as we start to talk about the charge that you all gave us and the superintendent about looking at how can we provide that support, the teams dove right in to look at what that support would look like and how would we do that within the schedule that we currently have. So the way this would work is 5 days we would keep our 100% remote as our foundational delivery of our instruction. But then built in within the schedule, and the teams, Ms. Scheib was straight on when she said, yes, these teams are not done. Their work is not done. I don't think they'll ever be done because the next thing they'll do the next 2 weeks is finalize building in this support component into the schedules that we have. So we're looking at small groups of students coming in, and that could be the 3 types of students that we were targeting. Our students who are struggling, you saw some of the data that we're concerned about for students who are failing. They may be the English learners who are having some of the language barriers around because they just arrived to this country. It could be students with some mental health needs that need to come in and see counselors. So it could be academic, but it also could be some of that social emotional support as well. It could be accelerated students who are in higher level courses, but because of the remote environment, they just need to come in and get some additional support. If you think of our advanced placement, our AP classes at the high school level, students oftentimes need some extra boost to be able to handle that level of rigor or to prepare for the AP tests. So that would be, absolutely okay for the students to come in a small group to get that support. And then just as Dr. Hall earlier talked about the graduation, those seniors who need support towards finishing up an industry credential that they're using for graduation, all those critical skills and competencies and time needed to make sure that we keep our high graduation rate continuing to move forward, especially the trajectory that we've been increasing each year. We don't want to see any kind of slide back from the progress that we've made. I'm going to click on here and actually open up the document that we sent to you earlier, the superintendent sent on Friday, that outlines more of the details of how this will work. So this framework for the 100% remote plus the site-based support, there's 4 key components. The first one is maintaining this 5 days of 100% remote. and then moving into this site-based small group support that I was just describing with the types of students that we're looking at providing support. Some of the stories that we heard in our reopening teams from teachers were sometimes it's students that are in environments that are not conducive to the remote learning. And if they could just have a designated time each week to come in and get that support and be able to finish assignments or just get removed from sometimes some chaotic environments, either at daycare or at home, to be able to get that support, then this support system would be able to help with that. The way that students would be identified is through our teacher teams in collaboration with the principals in the building, that we would look at our K-8 professional learning communities, we call them our PLCs, or at the high school, it might be the high school academy teams that will, excuse me, work a collaborative process to identify across the grade level or across the academy which students need support. The educators would, as that grade level team or as the academy, they would volunteer to come in to provide that support to the students. So it's a grade level team or it's an academy team at the high school that collaboratively looks at which students are struggling or need this extra support or need to come in for that industry credential or the lab time that they need. And then they would talk amongst themselves in terms of who would volunteer to come in to provide that support during the designated support kind of block of time. So it would all be.
If I could just add, I didn't mean to interrupt you, I'm sorry. So on the staff survey that AEA sent out to the educators, we did ask the question if we would utilize some type of support model with our remote model, how many teachers would be willing to come in to be a site-based support teacher. And we did get a good portion of them, and we believe it's across, we'll be able to break it down in the next week or so into actual grade levels, but we do believe it's across the district and across the grade bands. The teachers and the teams that have been putting these models together did have some concerns that they want to work out. One of those being that they would be the voluntary site-based teachers, but also they're concerned that this enrichment and intervention time did not take away too much of the actual direct instruction time, as our blended model we felt did. They feel, the teams feel that there's a way to develop a schedule that can alleviate that concern. They also were very adamant that they that we, and I believe that this can happen, that the teacher teams in the buildings at the grade levels, the academy teams, the PLCs, the collaborative teams were the ones that would talk about which of their students would need this kind of support, because the teachers are on the ground there. They know their students better than any of us. And and like Dr. McWilliams-Woods said, some of those students are just struggling because they have technology issues, or they have siblings that are sitting at the dining room table with them and they can't concentrate. So in addition to our students that need academic supports, they'd also be looking at those individual circumstances. And most importantly, they really believe that an intervention enrichment model has to be delivered to small group sizes to make an impact. So on those site-based days or day during the week, whatever the teams come up with as far as a schedule, they want to maintain small class sizes. If you're talking, 6 to 8 students at the most, to really be able to make an impact, not bringing in a whole room full of students, because that's what intervention is: small group work with the students.
So the way we would move forward with this in terms of the logistics is our reopening teams would meet the next couple weeks to map out exactly for each grade band where this support time will be built into the schedule. And then based on that, obviously transportation will follow. Right now, any student who normally would be eligible for transportation would be afforded that during based on this plan. We do know from the family survey that there are quite a few parents who normally get their students normally get transportation that they said they wouldn't participate. But I want to make sure and reassure all the families that that survey was just getting a pulse of where families were, that if your child is identified by the teacher teams to come in, we'll be working with you individually to see if transportation is something that you want us to schedule. We anticipate that students like this first, we're looking at a target date of November 30th to get started with this. And we would anticipate that the students identified, they would be consistent over that time period, maybe through the rest of this 9-week time period, or it might be, a good part of that time. We don't anticipate different kids every single, week. We see that it would be some students who need it. If a student comes in for 3 weeks, gets all their assignments done and is doing well, then certainly the teacher team could say, okay, that student doesn't need to come back and continue. But otherwise, it's most likely students who need that level of intensive type support for the time period through the next 9 weeks potentially. But again, I want to reinforce what Ms. Shipe said, that this is no cookie cutter approach. This isn't where the district is going to say, here's the criteria and the exact reading score or the exact math score that warrants kids coming in, because we have kids who are the lowest performing students who are thriving on remote. And then we have some students that are typically very high performing who are struggling in the remote environment. And so this has to be left to the teachers to say who needs that site-based personal approach during this time period, given how they're performing in this remote environment. The other thing that we wanted to kind of keep included in this is our ability also to look at our extended day services. Some of the board members were talking about earlier our 2 extended day, which is our Akron After School program. And then we also do other after school programming through some of our school improvement funds that we can do some after school programming. We want to, over this next month, take a look at that as well to see if we'd like to pair some of the extended day services that are being offered remotely right now, whether we'd like to pair some of that with this support time that we're building into the calendars so that students could get even a double dose of support potentially. So we have just that we'll continue to explore that over this next 2 to 4 weeks before that November 30th. I would anticipate that extended day may not happen till that second semester in the middle of January, but we want to at least explore that opportunity. So that is the remote plus this site-based support approach. The big picture is keeping the 5 days of instruction that is so important for both our families and our faculty, and keeping the level of kind of the routine and the rituals and the rigor that's happening right now that is played out with the particularly some of the data that I shared tonight. But then adding that site-based support for students who need it for various reasons, but who need it. And giving the superintendent flexibility to be able to, tonight we're asking for bless the plan of remote plus site-based support. And then the superintendent, can kind of, I said this is the perfect way to enable weekly kinds of changes. If we go purple, obviously the level 4, the superintendent is going to want to not have site-based support. And that would be something quickly he could do, similar to how he's had to make adjustments with some of our sports teams. That this is something that isn't having 21,000 students come back and having to all of a sudden go remote again, but these are smaller groups of students that we can easily make adjustments on how we're bringing them in, or the number of students, or not at all if we end up, the data ends up getting worse.
However, I will add to that, if I may, Ellen.
Mhm.
What we didn't mention was during that intervention enrichment support time, say for instance, if it was one day or if it was during block schedule of time, during the site support based time, we'll also have intervention and enrichment remotely. So those students, the teachers that are remote will not revert to their regular schedules. Everybody across the district will be doing intervention or enrichment, either site-based or remotely. So those students that don't necessarily, the families do not want to send them in for site-based support, can keep them remote, and we will have staff working on interventions during that time also remotely.
Right, that was a great point to add. So that is our presentation. At this point, we're happy to answer questions.
Great, thank you for that presentation. Appreciate it. To our board, I left a comment to you in the chat. If you could check that, and please let me know if you'd like to jump in line. Just a couple of questions that I've received, probably multiple times, I would say, in the emails, phone calls, social media contacts that I've had over the last couple of weeks. We had mentioned, you know, when we did the original blended model, it was sort of 2 days of instruction and 2 days of in-person and 2 days of remote, so that there were 4 total days of instruction and the possibility of sort of that Friday being more flexible, enrichment, interventions, specials, those sorts of things. And so the question is, would the staff survey, do we think the staff surveys would have been different if the blended model would have been different? Because there seemed to be a big concern both from parents and teachers around losing those additional days of instruction each week, dropping from 5 to 2, and recognizing that some people might not agree, but for the 60% of parents that wanted their students to return to the classroom, that could have been the possible trade-off, is that we may not be able to guarantee if we do that, you'll keep the same teachers. And so I know it's disruptive, and I'm not suggesting that we do that, but were there other issues with keeping those 2 days of remote instruction as well, so that we still had at least a total of 4 days of direct instruction?
We did our teams, and this was really early in the summertime. Our school model teams looked at many different models of how to do blended. From what we presented to you with that cohort type model to some districts across the country don't do any separate teachers for remote. They do, even the remote students who are at home 100%, they pipe into the school. And some districts put cameras in all the classrooms to enable that to happen. Some districts did, for a remote, they didn't use their regular teachers at all, but they had them go to more of an asynchronous, which means you're not piping into a live video conference like we do, that it's more independent type remote. So some districts put their remote students over here in a contract similar to APS Online, although we do have some live instruction that happens with that. But there are some providers for remote that are all just content online, and you have a teacher that you can go help or ask for help, but they're not doing regular instruction. So that is a different model that some districts, it enabled them to use all their staff then to split the classrooms into smaller class sizes. So that is another, option that we looked at. We believe that having students remotely, it was real critical and important to be connected with live instruction, and we have the technology and the training to enable our teachers to do that. And so we felt as though our families wanted that. All the questions that I got over the summertime were from families saying, is this remote going to be, is it going to be live with my teachers like it was in the spring? Or is it going to be like, some of the companies that you're just doing completely on your own? And that was really important for the families to have live connection with their teachers via the Google Meets, the video conferencing. So we looked at all those models. The other model that some districts have done that our teams talked about is having the teachers, even if you do the blended where half of the kids come in, that you have the students still get to watch the live instruction happening on the remote days. We talked about that. The biggest struggle is the classroom management of that and having your lessons go two ways, a digital way and a site-based face-to-face way. So, and to do the classroom management of trying to manage, 12 to 14 kids online, and then to try to manage 12 kids site-based, or it might even be more remote and 12 kids site-based at the same time. The teachers talked to a number of teachers in other districts and found that to be a very difficult model to pull off. So the teams went with the model that we chose, which was the two site-based days and then the self-directed remote, and planning those lessons that way. It's almost like a combination of the remote instruction that I was explaining that a lot of districts have contracted and site-based. It's almost combining those two models.
If I could add also, if I've heard once, I've heard 100 times, and I'm sure many of you have also, that our teachers really want to make a distinction between lesson delivery and rigor from March, a week or two after we started this, to what they're doing this fall and what they started the year with. It doesn't compare. They utilized their entire summer, the first 2 weeks of school. They've really gone above and beyond across this district to deliver very rigorous instruction. And I think it's showing, and I think it's only going to improve in the types of instruction. Like Dr. Hall said earlier, we have to make a mind shift about what on-site instruction would look like. And I think that shift is that it's not going to look what we believe it will look like in times. It's going to be different. And our educators really believe that the benefits of this type of model, staying remote, having that direct instruction with their students, with their families that they built relationships with, and then having some kind of supports put in place in addition to that remote instruction, is really what is in the best interest of not only our students, but our staff. They really believe they're making great strides with that model. So I want to acknowledge that.
And I will tell you that all of the models that we charted out at the beginning of the year, every single model comes with lots of pros and lots of cons. The perfect model is there's no COVID-19 and we're all back in school together. And we still would have remote options through APS Online for families who would like to continue with that. So I think every model, comes with pros and cons. We went with the best model that we felt as though, especially this summer, coming into the blended that we proposed back on June 29th. We can look at all those other models as we go through, the rest of the second 9 weeks. But we feel as though right now, the best thing because of the increase in COVID that's happening right now, we'd like to just start getting students in the site-based support, and then we can continue to look at models for the second semester.
Thank you. And my second question before we head to Ms. Mansfield and then Dr. Hall is this. I think that we need to provide as much flexibility to the superintendent and our staff as possible if this is the model to be chosen, particularly when it comes around identifying students who may need those extra interventions and that enrichment. I also agree that our teachers certainly know better than we do which students those are, and I like the flexibility that you've built in. I do have a question. I don't know if it's necessarily a concern, but 60% of our parents said that they wanted a blended model, and I'm assuming that there are a portion of those who know their children even better than any of the rest of us do. And the data that you show that at least for across the district largely, there are some areas of concern to be watched and to be monitored and make sure that we don't slide as you suggested. But all of that being said, there are parents who, 60% of whom said they would prefer to go to a blended model. And of that set of parents, there are some who feel their students are struggling. How can a parent be sure, or what if there is a parent who has a child that they feel is really struggling, but is maybe not necessarily identified by the teacher? Or what if there is a disagreement between whether or not a child should qualify for those additional interventions or enrichments? How is a parent to navigate that, or how do we prevent them from maybe having to reach out to say, hey, my child kind of is getting left behind here?
Sure. I think, we deal with that every single day in brick and mortar days as well, that there are core services that happen. And then there's decisions made by teacher teams and by the supports that are provided at each of our buildings on which students need the additional tutoring supports, which students need that extra small group reading time with the core classroom teacher, which students need additional math support, which students do we need in our after school programming to get even additional reading or math support. So I think those decisions are happening all the time. So we're used to working collaboratively in that way and listening to families who have concerns, trying to figure out which intervention is the best or which support is the best. We're intervening with students every single day right now remotely. And we're doing it during the office hours. We're doing it in small groups during instruction by having tutors come in and support and take students. It's happening all the time now. What this layer is, which students would need that site-based versus the remote intervention and enrichment type support. So I think the process will be very similar to what we're already doing every single day previously in brick and mortar days.
And I would add to that, not only are we intervening every day with students, we're intervening with families every day. And we have the connectors in place. We have the teacher teams in place. We have the administrators. I believe that there were always concerns by parents, but I think most of the time those concerns were addressed. And I have every reason to believe that will continue to happen, even in this model. While that is a concern, Mr. Bravo, I understand that. I do believe that our teams will come up with a model that will not only address that type of thing, but improve any families that feel that they're being left behind.
Thank you both. Ms. Mansfield?
Wow, Patrick, we're like on the same wavelength here. Both of my questions, I'm going to just piggyback off of you because I think you kind of, I had them in the reverse order, but you kind of got right in there where I was going. I think that to support this and all of the hard work. I don't want anyone to think that I don't appreciate all the hard work that's gone into this for months and months and hours and hours. I'm willing to support where we are right now. I really think that I would like to, as a board member, see us get to a place that is what Patrick talked about first. So by January, I would love to see us in a place where we're in a blended model, where that relationship with teacher is maintained. So if it's 2 days in, 2 days out, those same 2 days are with their teacher, with their class that they've established a relationship with. And my willingness would be, let's find that classroom support that those teachers are going to need for that classroom management. Let's get those people into the classroom that we need to have, whether that means CARES Act money, if that means connectors, if that means pulling staff from somewhere else, something so that we can get parents, or our educators and our parents on the same maybe percentage or a little closer. I really want to see that happen. I know that it's difficult because it means taking that giant leap to come in. And a lot of our teachers are teaching in the classroom and a lot are not. I would also say that we have staff who's been in since March. We have staff that is there every day that are in often cases are lower paid. The ones who are going to be most exposed to things. And I want to make sure that we acknowledge that they are there and they are working and they're there. I guess I can't think of what else to say. So I would really like to see us get there by January. I think I go back to that June model. I think I have this kind of model that I've heard a lot of our counterparts are doing, not just in the suburban districts, but also in the in some of our urban counterparts that have gone blended. So I'm sorry, that was more commentary than anything else, and a begging for us as a board to please help you to get those classroom managements handled so that we can get more time in the classroom. My other question was, again, piggybacking off Patrick, and how students are identified and how they qualify. I've got a list right here that are the ones that are people who are contacting me who cell phone to, because I was so heartbroken. And so there's me. I have a grandmother of a special ed student who, I'm not going to go into any details at risk of exposing who the kiddo is. This isn't working for him. A kindergarten teacher who is begging us for greater access. High school students who are in mental health crises. Younger students who this isn't working for. We heard from 2 parents today that spoke to us. SPED teachers who are begging to be in front of their students. We talk about how it's working for some, but some of those families took leaves of absence from work. There's some statistics that show that women in particular have left their jobs in a huge number to try to help take care of kids and handle their schooling. So I think that I'm asking is, how do we hear that voice? How do we acknowledge the fact that 60% of our parents, although some have come back and said, I would take that back if I knew what this blended model was going to look like, right? They've wanted to exchange their vote, or for all intensive purposes. How can we better hear those voices in this as well? And I'll stop talking.
I love everything that you said in terms of elevating the voices of the students that are struggling and the families who've had to alter their entire lives to accommodate this remote learning plan that we have in place. And it is gut-wrenching to hear those stories. As we've said, we'll also hear the stories of things that are going well, but especially from my background with special ed background. Ms. Shipe has the special ed background as well. We always tend to lean in to hear the stories and make sure that we're putting those supports in for students who are not being successful. Even if it's a smaller percentage or a middle percentage of students, we've got to keep working to make sure that we're meeting students' needs and not letting them struggle on a daily basis. So what I think our commitment to you is that we will continue. The plan right now is to start some support, and that is a big step, right now, to say, let's start bringing students in for the support. We will learn from the process of bringing students in to see how that works. I trust our teacher teams beyond imagine to be able to figure it out and to make it work. And then right away, Ms. Shipe already said that our reopening teams will never be done, or they probably thought they were done, but they're not done. That will continue to work over this next month, because I really would like to bring you a proposal. It will have to be before winter break to say, here's the proposal for the next 9 weeks, or for second semester if we decide to go with the whole semester. I think we'll see a lot and learn a lot about this new surge and going into the winter, and see what happens through this time period in terms of our Summit County data. But I think we will continue to look at other options. We have a sense that the blended, the way that we designed it, would be very disruptive if we did that second semester. If we don't do it now, it becomes more and more disruptive the way that we designed it. So we will keep meeting and keep talking about other options that we may be able to present to you before that winter break.
And I absolutely agree with everything that Dr. McWilliams-Woods just said. And Mrs. Mansfield, I too acknowledge the struggling that everybody is doing, quite frankly, through these times where the stakes are so high for everybody. I will say, though, I will continue to support those committees, those teacher and administrative committees. They are listening to families, to students, to other teachers. And I believe that this remote plus model with the supports are actually listening to our own educators, the portion of them who'd like to come back in and work on site with students, those special educators, those core teachers. We are developing this model to try to enable some of them to start back with their students on site, as long as the science supports it.
Thank you so much. Dr. Hall?
Yeah, I'm glad we're doing a round robin. I've got more than 2 questions, so you can put me back in the queue, Mr. President. So my first question was, we were using November 30th as the date. I just want to sort of, and this may be a really sort of overly simplified question, but is that enough time? I just want to make sure, as we're thinking through this, Ms. Shipe, Dr. McWilliams-Woods, you guys both sort of talked about all the moving pieces here, right? That have to be accounted for. So I just, I don't want to set, us up for failure from the start because we chose a timeline that wasn't in fact realistic. So my first question is November 30th a realistic timeline? I know Thanksgiving's right around there. I know Christmas is like 4 weeks later, and then there's New Year's. So, again, I feel compelled to ask that question. Is November 30th, are you both in agreement, and as well as Dr. James, around that being enough time to get this up and running?
I think that's our target goal, and Ms. Shipe and I can always, slow it down if we need to, if we find that we need more time. But frankly, we have been preparing for this moment since June 1st. Every single day since June 1st, I've been spending, and all of our teacher teams and my administrative team and Miss Shipe and all of her team, we've been working, probably 3/4 of our schedule has been focused on reopening. And each model that we've brought to you, we've talked about how we're going to do transportation, all the safety protocols, how we're going to do all the logistics. Each model, we're just tweaking it and we're, shifting it a little bit, but the fundamental plans are the same. So we've been ready since June 29th, I guess I should say, when we actually presented the model. We've been ready since then. This will map out the planning. We'll look at the schedules the next couple weeks, and then we'll work with families to make it happen. So I have lots of confidence that we'll be able to get something started before that winter break. And we won't, the academic side of me, Dr. Hall, when I'm seeing students with increased Fs and decreased As, and I've got high school students where that equates to they're not graduating, which is a life-altering pathway. And if I've got young students who are not reading on grade level, all of the data says we have a short window of time to be able to make those changes. For me to say that I can't get this together before winter break and we have to wait till second semester, I'm making life-altering decisions for the students, and I can't do that. We've got to find a way to start bringing students in before the semester, where those are huge marking period grades at the end of that semester, especially for our high school students, and I just can't wait.
And I will say that we have tossed that question around with frequency lately. I agree that as long as Dr. McWilliams-Woods and I have the ability to slow it down if needed, our teachers, I had said earlier, our AEA leadership, myself included, are concerned that, and we have been preparing since June, there are questions that we need answered before then. Can we do that in the next 4 weeks? Probably. We will certainly report back to you if we think we need to slow it down. There are 3 full weeks between returning from Thanksgiving break and starting winter break. That's a lot of instructional time. So I think it's a kind of stay tuned type of thing, but I believe that our committees have risen to every task that we've asked of them, and they'll do the same.
Great, thank you. I appreciate it. Because I think the community needs to understand how closely you all are working together. I think that's an integral ingredient to moving all of us forward. So thank you both. I appreciate it. My second, it's actually a question comment combo. Is in all seriousness, we've been talking for probably 4 months now about the need to have some transparency with respect to the sort of metrics that we're going to utilize to make a decision about when we do go back, in a more concerted way. The one thing I would want to put out to everyone on this call is that if we're committing to November 30th, this being the time that we would start this new model, I think that we also have to set that as a deadline to have a community dashboard available for for folks to be able to look at. That is it, where it's fleshed out, where it contains, it might be 4 or 5 metrics, it might be 8 or 9 or 10 metrics, but just kind of key indicators or indicia that we're going to utilize, that the community can tune into, that they can look at to see sort of what we're relying upon in making our decisions. I think that's still the point, the key part that's still missing. I'm not pointing a finger at anybody. I think it's on all of us together collectively, myself included, to sort of make sure that we prioritize, whether that's getting with Ms. Scota over at Summit County Public Health, or other sort of infectious disease experts to sort of talk through. And by the way, we're not reinventing the wheel here, right? I mean, like, these metrics already exist. These dashboards already exist. Just as an organization, we haven't chosen to adopt any one dashboard or sort of metrics yet. But I But I would strongly encourage this group. I think we have to seriously sort of move forward with pulling together, that dashboard, something that this group and team kind of agree on makes sense to kind of use as that guide, not a definitive, but as sort of a list of sort of guiding principles or guiding metrics that we're going to be signatory to as we move forward. I think that's still, so I love that. I love and appreciate all the work that's gone into this. I definitely, continue to sympathize with parents that want their kids back in school. As I said at the outset, we were never going to come up with something that was going to make everybody happy. But I do think that, as we move this forward, I think that if the more transparency we can provide with respect to sort of this collective body's thought process and how we get to eventually getting back, getting back to school, kids to school, I think that's super important. So the question that's embedded in there is really to Dr. James and you, Dr. McWilliams-Woods as well. And that is, what are your thoughts around sort of helping to energize the conversation and ensure that by the time we launch this model that we have that dashboard in place?
I'll go first here just to say, and I know Dr. James has lots of thoughts about this as well, but I think we absolutely need to do that. I think you all have named the criteria and have talked about it. And just like you said, Dr. Hall, it exists. It's just adopting what you want to use. And so I don't think it will be that difficult, but I think it's really important for our families and our faculty to be able to know what those benchmarks are that you're looking for to trigger coming, back to a blended model or to the 5-day site-based.
And Dr. James, if I could just jump in here before you so I don't interrupt you. What our teachers and I believe what our families do not want, however, they want stability. What they don't want is jumping back and forth between models. I think that would be a huge disservice and detriment to any one particular model. We have to be able to plan. The students need to know where they're going to be every day and how they're going to be there. And by jumping back and forth, I just think it would be, like I said, a huge detriment to any one particular model. Thank you.
No, I totally agree. And I agree with you, Dr. Hall. The data's there, but the issue is on who you're going to listen to. I am much more interested in listening and looking at the data that we get out of our own local health department, because they're the ones who usually get data about infections in our community first, because they're the ones who call us and say you need to do contact tracing. We see a discrepancy sometimes between the number of cases that we have and what's reported out from Columbus, because there is a lag. So I'm more comfortable with looking at our local data. If we happen to be in category 4 purple, I don't think we should have any in-person, meetings with our students. More of our staff should be working remotely. But when we're in red or level 3, I think we've shown some of the safety things that we're doing, some of the technology that we're using, and I feel comfortable with some of those small groups. If we're in orange and yellow, particularly for a sustained period of time and we're going in the right direction, then I'm much more comfortable with some kind of blended model or even an in-person model, as long as the trends are going in the right direction. But that is the rub. We can't really predict with, I think, any confidence, because it's all based, our virus spread is based on a lot of human behavior. And I think that's the situation that we're in, and that's the problem. We can control to a certain extent what happens in our schools, a combination of working with our parents, our students, our teachers, and other staff. But what happens outside of school is a big driver of where we're going in this community. So in terms of the guidelines and metrics that we would use. It just probably comes from, most likely, and that's what we've been listening to, is our local data and the trajectory of where it's going. But I agree with Pat that we can't flip-flop, going, like we're going to do this today, and then next week when there's a change, it'll be something else. Part of me thinks that whenever we decide we're going to go with some kind of more of a blended model where more kids come in, we might have to say that's the path we're on. And if we, depending on how we implement that, we may have to, just kind of continue down that pathway and keep our fingers crossed that our COVID rates are going to kind of follow, where we don't have to move away from it, and jump back to something that's a little bit more restrictive. But again, all of that is going to be completely up in the air until, we get a little bit further down the path, particularly as we approach our holidays. And, so here's the difficulty. A parent sent their kid for a practice. Kid had a runny nose. Oh, I thought it was a cold. Well, it wasn't. That kid tested positive for COVID, put out, a whole team, a whole sport team of people and coaches that had to isolate. Those are the types of things that, it's not that, we aren't even sure how many if anyone was infected at the, on the team, but the problem is the guidelines are people have to self-isolate. And that's the problem. When people don't consider, one, where a person said, well, I don't have any contacts. Well, what about the people you live with? Oh, it's like we have to think about those things. A contact isn't just someone you run into at work or at school or pass by in the grocery store. It's also the people you live with. And so those are those are just the difficult reality that we face, with this whole thing.
Thank you. Ms. Autry?
Thank you, Mr. President. And I have more just of a comment, not a question. And I just wanted to share my appreciation for the committees, the team, and what I really appreciate about all of this is just seeing the relationships between the teachers and the families strengthening throughout this whole process from day one. That's what this pandemic has allowed us. And I think if we just continue on that path, being open, and the teachers continue listening to the families. I know I've had questions as well about, if folks feel like their student needs the enrichment and can't get it. I feel like as long as we stay on the path of being open and listening to families and continuing to build the relationships, that we will be okay in that sense. And then just speaking from the nursing field, one thing that translates is having that continuity. That's so important when I think about my patients, having the same nurse and knowing what to expect. So I think that translates as well into education. And that's what I really appreciate about this Remote Plus option that you've presented to us. So I just wanted to share that and thank the committee.
Thank you, Ms. Autry. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Autry. Ms. McKittrick, and then Dr. Akbar.
Thank you, President Bravo. First of all, I want to thank everyone for the feedback from families, faculty, staff, and the community. I want you to know that I'm listening to everything that you have to say. I also want to thank everybody who's worked on this plan. I appreciate your service and your dedication to our children. And I know we would all like to have our children go back to school 5 days a week like we did pre-COVID. But the reality is we're not even post-COVID. In fact, this worldwide pandemic is getting worse and worse, right? We've seen the numbers in Europe going up, in the country going up, in our state going up. So while I know this isn't the ideal situation, I think it's the best given where we are with this virus. And so I like that this plan will help us to continue reaching students 5 days a week with the instruction and the rapport they've set up with their teachers. And so the other thing I'd like to comment on, and then I'll stop, is that the teachers who are going to volunteer to come in to do those individualized group supports, please let's remember that they are volunteering to do that, that we aren't forcing anyone back, and that the students and the teachers who take part in that, we are absolutely not using them as guinea pigs, because that is some of the information that I've gotten, that we're setting these kids and faculty members and staff members up as guinea pigs, and we're going to sort of throw them in there and see what happens, and then decide on a different model later based on how those kids and adults do. And so I want to make very clear that those teachers are volunteering for that, and that if parents don't, even if parents' children are identified, that they absolutely don't have to be a part of that plan either, because we are not forcing anyone into any of these situations. So I appreciate all the hard work that's gone into this, and thank you all very much.
Thank
And
you.
I agree with you, Ms. McKittrick. I do want to make that point, that it is a volunteer basis for both teachers and students. But I also want to make the point that at all times, the superintendent would have the ability to pull back from that should the data show that even that volunteer situation would put people at risk.
Right, and it reinforces what we talked about before, that this model is a model that's easier to do, that the superintendent can be monitoring and working with the Summit County Public Health like he does and Deborah Folk does every single day, to be able to monitor that. And I think that's critical, that it's voluntary on both sides. And I want to also reinforce, and that's why we wanted to have Deborah, Mrs. Folk, have her presentation first to show. And I talked to my colleagues in Summit County and Ohio 8 schools, and actually some across the country regularly. We all have a club trying to work through all these tough decisions that every district is having to make. And I will tell you that and this is based on your direction as a board, our health protocols are stricter than nearly all other districts that I have come into contact with. The districts in Summit County, 70 schools and districts are back 5 days a week. And that primarily is not with 6 feet social distance. We're not asking for that. We're saying 6 feet social distance. We're talking about small groups of students coming back. Our protocols are much stricter than the typical ones that exist in schools across Ohio and frankly in quite a few districts across the country. So I want to make sure that families feel comfortable and the faculty who volunteer feel very comfortable coming back.
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. McKittrick. Dr. Akbar?
Yes, thank you, Ms. McKittrick, for mentioning that, and Dr. McWilliams-Woods and Ms. Shipe for the comments you just made. That's really, some of my concerns have been around, making sure that we stay safe, knowing that whether we do anything differently than what we're doing now, or we continue to do what we're doing now, there are risks involved all around. There's no non-risk option. I wish there was. And so my two comments has to do with social determinants of health, knowing that the highest COVID cases in Summit County are within Akron Public School District. And we talked about building a dashboard and having that dashboard be the guiding post for us as we move forward in making the decisions of what to do. I think that that is going to be critically important. I'm definitely in support of that. And I think that as we build that dashboard, what Sumner County Public Health doesn't do is give you the overlay of social determinants of health. And as we have the two highest disproportionate rates in our district, as well as the most diverse population in the county, we need to overlay that with whatever numbers we get, knowing that those things can spiral even faster than, if you don't have those characteristics. We do know that. So that was my one question, and then my comment. And I just want to go also on the record to say that the plan that you presented today was basically the way I imagined we should have had like a month ago or 2 months ago, whatever it was. It was basically you presented to us today what I had in my head called phase to blended. So thank you for presenting that. I think that if I would give you one thing about the plan that you have, I think that it's really good, and we're focusing on the right populations. I would find a way for the students who are in the highest needs, special needs areas to maybe try again, if they volunteer to come in, to try to get them in as much as possible. And also, what am I trying to say? Build that routine. Because as I was saying before, I think that if we can build the routine and get students with the most special needs and most severe needs for us to get in a routine within the schools, we can do that with other groups of students. And I think that that will allow us to spread this out and get to a blended model that will work, I believe. So thank you for presenting that, and I look forward to hearing all the feedback that you receive from it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm glad you brought up specifically the students with the most significant disabilities, because the teams, we do have a separate team of faculty that serve students with our most severe disabilities, and they will be able to have the flexibility to meet and talk about what would be the best way to build this into their schedule, this support time. As you know, we also had already proposed the after-school program that you had approved for students with more severe disabilities to come in after school. And so that team will look at whether this support time is in addition to that after-school time and that continues, or whether it'll be somehow combined. And we'll have, this week will be important because we were about ready to start the after school program within the next week or two. So we're going to have that team come together to figure out whether it's both or whether it's a kind of a combination of that after school program idea and the support team. And we've got great faculty that are working on that.
Good, thank you, Dr. Akbar. Anyone else would like to speak before we head around the Zoom room again? Mr. Alexander, anything you'd like to add? Okay. Dr. Hall, then, you had additional questions. You're up next again.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate it. Yeah, so I was trying to wrap my head around in this model, sort of hypothetically, and again, this may be a question that you don't have an answer to yet, and that's fine. But are there limits to how many kids could be selected for this additional sort of intervention? Are we talking, I mean, and then also, So question one, so that's my question is, are there any, what are sort of what's the capacity, if you will, to sort of address students that are in need?
So we talked about that, and while we don't have a firm number, again, I'll say in general, our educators were concerned that intervention models, and this is, I'm an intervention specialist also, and it always been, you're talking about when you're administering interventions or enrichments, you're talking about small group work. So while it may not look about like the numbers we were talking about in the former blended model, the 12 to a classroom or 6 feet, it may look more like 6, maybe 8, but it would depend on the building and what the educators came up with, the number of students first that would need those interventions, and they would go from there. Some classrooms may look smaller than other classrooms, depending on the grade level it is. But I do know that they would be looking at maximizing the number of students that they would have in a classroom while keeping it still a small group intervention. But the committees will be looking at that, and I anticipate that we would feel comfortable, like I said before, when we get some more of those details, when we know the number of teacher volunteering for on-site interventions, the number of students interested, where those teachers and students are spread out across the district by grade levels and by buildings. And we'll be able to get a little bit more of an idea about the details of that in the next few weeks.
Okay. So hypothetically, let's say I'm in 3rd grade and I've been identified as, as a student that needs some additional intervention. Hypothetically, how many times could I be at school per week getting that additional help? Would it be once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week? Is that kind of set, or is that still kind of being worked out as well?
Right, that's being talked about. It could be a day, it could be blocks of time during the week. That's up to the committees to refine that over the next few weeks. Going back to one of the most important things that our educators are talking about is not losing that direct instruction time. So while we want to reach as many students with enrichments and with interventions, as you multiply those times, you're losing the direct instruction. And we don't want to return to the original blended model where we cut in more than half, cut into that direct instruction time.
Okay, thank you. I've got another question or comment or two, but there are other questions. I'm going to see the floor as we go round and round one more time. Thank you both.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Mansfield. And then Dr.
I know we've touched on this just a little bit, but I'm trying to keep this real higher level and board level requests here. I would really like to see also on our website, in our published documents, what the board can give in a 30-second elevator speech, what our criteria are going to be going forward. I know Ms. Shive said we're going to follow the science. I know Dr. James said that we're going to look to local. Totally get that. Did a lot of research in the last couple weeks. One of the sites I was on was Toledo's, and theirs is explicitly spelled out for right on their website what their criteria are for being in. Although I think they're breaking it this week, actually, if they're headed toward red and purple and they just went back in. But that's the risk you're going to run, is the timing of our schooling isn't the timing of the virus, unfortunately. But I would really love to have us be able to recite that, to say it, to know. So when somebody emails us and says, great, we're going back to blended, easily explain what that's going to look like. So that's just a request more than a question. So I apologize, it's not a question, but.
That's okay. Dr. Akbar?
Sorry, for some reason my mouse likes to jump around. Um, so I guess I have a question more so about how this will all work. And I'm going to ask it because I don't exactly know how to say it and just figure out how it's done. So one of the biggest concerns that we've received about the blended model that was originally submitted was that the students wouldn't have the teachers that they currently have, and parents really want their students to stay with the teachers that they have. So I want to honor that and think about this model. So the teacher that the student has selects a student that needs additional support. Can you give us an idea of how much of the time would they be with their teacher that they have that the parents love, plus going into the school building with what I'm assuming is a different teacher to receive the enrichments? So would that be determined by the teacher and the parent, or would that just be determined by the teacher? So I know that there's a lot of people out here watching, and that might be a question that they have.
Yeah, it's important for us to, say that the teams are working on how to embed it in the schedule. So we always have to be really careful that as soon as we give an example, then that's what everybody thinks it's going to be. And we had the teams meet, come together, look at this remote plus site-based support. They all threw around lots of different ways that they could do it, whether it's at the end of the day, there's an intervention time, whether it's a Friday, whether it's half a day, a full day. They threw out a number of ideas, but we didn't ask them to finalize it because we wanted to get through this point of approving the framework first, and then go ahead and now let's finalize for each grade band. So K3, this is what it would look like for that 4 or 5 middle school and high school. And it could look different depending on those grade bands. That would be absolutely fine with us. As long as, whenever I say things like that, that's when Mrs. Folk just about falls over on her chair, because I always think everything is possible until you get to the timing of transportation and things like that. So we'll have to work through those logistics. But whatever that time is, so if it's a Friday or if it's a half a day on Friday where the students are coming in, then in a grade level team, for example, if it's a 3rd grade team and there's 3 3rd grade teachers, that team is going to talk about which students need that support. If one of those teachers volunteers to come in, those other 2 teachers then are supporting that teacher's students during that intervention block, or the tutors are supporting during that time, or the intervention specialists are also supporting. We operate in teams all the time, so this isn't that unusual. A number of our grade level teams work collaboratively and share students anyway. You take the students that are struggling in reading, and that happens all the time.
I don't want to interrupt you, but Patrick just fell off. So I just want to get.
Oh, good. Glad you
back.
caught that.
Yeah, sorry. Wasn't trying to be rude.
Oh, that's okay.
He was having some connection issues, so hold on 1 minute.
Okay. Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks.
And just for those who are watching, we typically actually take a pause if one of our board members fall off, and it happened to be our president. It looks like he's back on. All right. Thank you, Patrick. Can you hear?
Yes, I can hear you if you can hear me. Thanks for waiting.
Yes,
I'll
no
come
problem.
back to what Dr. McWilliams-Woods said in that the challenge for our committees, and I believe that they will rise to it, is to find that sweet spot of dedicating enough time to the interventions for our at-need students and not give up a lot of that direct instructional time. So when they come up with their plans over the next few weeks, they're going to be looking over and over and over at that, is how many different ways and what would the best way be to deliver those interventions and enrichments, but not give up their teacher direct instruction time. I hope that answered some of your questions.
I think it answered all of it. And in fact, the reason why I brought it up is I was sitting here thinking about what was the biggest concern about blended from the past. And it just came to me like, that's what I heard more than anything. It's like, don't tread on my tires or on my lawn or whatever the phrase is. We have some sense of consistency with the teachers. We've built a rhythm now, and don't mess that up. And so I just wanted all of the different parents and family members, probably close to 30 or 40 by now, who shared that type of message. I wanted to follow up with that question because I was unsure, and I know that they probably at some point will come back and ask. So thank you for that. I think that answered all of those questions.
And Mr. Bravo, I'm not trying to do your job, but I saw a question there about clarifying volunteering. Volunteering just means volunteering to be an on-site teacher. They will still be doing that during their workday, just as the teachers that remain remote, it's during their workday. So that will be within their contractual time.
Yes, thank you for that. Appreciate that question, Ms. Mansfield. Would anyone else like to go as we head around the room? Hearing and seeing none, Dr. Hall, I know you had additional questions. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. So last two here. So I'd be remiss if I didn't ask this question because I've gotten multiple emails about this topic, and that's the Akron Early College and how they're accounted for. So I know that, and again, this may be an answer that I should know the answer to already, so I apologize if I don't. But I know that the questions I've been getting is, that the University of Akron's on a different schedule and yada, yada, yada. So I didn't have a great answer when I got asked that question about how we're accounting for Akron Early College. I know some of the parents have said, that they really sort of pressed on or pushed back on this idea of Akron Early College following the same rules as the rest of the district. For what they thought were obvious reasons that these kids are on campus, and U of A kind of governs the online versus in-class component. So that's my first question. If you could weigh in on that.
Yeah, Akron Early College, it is a unique situation because the students, especially the students as they get older, the juniors and seniors can be on campus the entire time taking their courses at the University of Akron. And the University of Akron, depending on the particular courses that they take, some of those could be blended, some site-based, some exclusively site-based. It's that combination like most of the universities have done. So certainly the university courses are unique for the students, but they also have some of the courses that are taught by our own faculty that are right now they're following the same remote type of process that everybody is, and they would also have the opportunity to work as a team, the faculty, to look at students who would need that site-based support. And the site-based support could be which students are struggling and need site-based support for their high school courses taught by their high school faculty, or it could be students who need the support for their university courses as well. So the same model would fit well, I think, in that environment.
Okay, great, thank you. And then the other question, so was sort of revisiting this idea of the dashboard and whatnot. I just want to be wary of, and I've done this before myself, and just kind of say, oh, well, in January when we go back to school. I mean, I think we have to be wary of just sort of arbitrarily sort of using saying January, for example, right? I mean, it could be February, it could be March. I mean, before things sort of level out, and so. And I know we talked a lot about stability. I think Dr. McWilliams-Woods and Shive and Dr. James and others have sort of echoed this need for stability. And I know that there were some districts early on that were following an approach where you had to be, maybe it was Columbus, I don't know, that had kind of proposed this idea of if you had to be 4 weeks, kind of decreases in cases for 4 weeks or before you would start back. So I don't know if that's something that we sort of resurrect or dust off and give some thought to. But as we move forward, I do think that to echo the earlier conveyed sentiments that that bouncing kids back and forth every week, because I mean, it was every Thursday, we get the update on what your county is going to be, right? And I think bouncing people back, bouncing folks back and forth on a week-to-week basis is just absurd, to be honest. And so I think that as we kind of think through kind of next steps, once we get into the next 9 weeks and what we're considering doing, I think that dashboard, we have to have that dashboard up and in place. And then again, there may be some amount of time that we have to be below a certain, benchmarks, if you will, from a performance standpoint before we would bring kids back. So it's just, so again, I just want to comment on that, so that way people weren't thinking that, oh, well, we're going back in January, because it may not be January, anyway, so those are my comments. And I believe that is it for me. So I appreciate this group indulging my multiple questions.
Thank you. And I don't see anyone else in line. Is there anyone else that would like to say anything before we wrap up this discussion? Okay, hearing and seeing none, I have just one or two final thoughts here. In regard to the dashboard and kind of picking up on that conversation, just from my perspective, I agree. Someone had said, the dashboards are out there already. They do exist to a degree, right? What I think would be most important, in my opinion, for this board would be using those dashboards. And I love, and I know Dr. Hall has mentioned it, I think Dr. James mentioned it for sure, is using the metrics that are there, and the dashboards are there, but setting that bar, which we've talked about before, where our community can expect that we would look at returning to a blended model or even to a full in-person model of instruction. I would like to see us set that bar at some point. Now, that being said, and I will support the plan that's in front of me tonight, because that's the plan that's in front of me, and I wasn't tasked with developing the plan, but this is the plan in front of me. I wish that we were looking at a blended model and maybe adopting the metrics now that would put us back into that blended model when the circumstances warranted. I love the idea of maybe following the color-coded chart that's used by the state and saying what we would do at the red and purple levels and what we would do at the yellow and orange levels. All of that being said, even if we were choosing a blended model now, I would prefer probably in the red and purple levels to be at a limited sort of what's being presented tonight at best. And certainly for the purple, a remote instruction and maybe some more relaxed blended options at the yellow and orange. That's just my opinion, but I also like those sustained decreases being part of that metrics, because as everyone said here, and I fully agree, we can't be moving between those levels and sort of flip-flopping back and forth. That's too disruptive for our parents, our students, and certainly our staff. I do hope that we have not passed a window already or aren't passing a window now. And certainly we need to be ready for that window when the second semester rolls around. Because as I said during the last meeting, my concern now is that if we choose to stay remote now, there's no guarantee that the conditions are going to be any better 6 to 7 to 8 weeks from now when we're sort of prepping that decision for the January timeframe. And if without that, setting that bar, without those metrics, without that in place first, we're going to be looking at things are no better now than they were when we made this decision tonight. And there's a good chance that we'll end up remote in January, in my opinion. And that concerns me a little bit because certainly that puts us in a bad position for the fourth quarter. So I have those concerns along with, reconciling the decisions that we make tonight with the decisions that we make on sports. And I'm not suggesting that sports doesn't move forward, but again, without all of those metrics in place, it's hard to reconcile those decisions. And even since we've been sitting in this board meeting, I've gotten those questions, as I'm sure you all have as well. So I think everyone on this board that has said it is correct, that I would really like to see us set those metrics or set those guideposts so that our public and our students know. By the way, Dr. Akbar mentioned the folks that are watching tonight. At any time I clicked on the stream, we had over 700 folks watching, and many of them were students and some of them were teachers, and it was fun to watch the students and the teachers interact a little bit on the side as we were going through this discussion and see what the students had to say as well. So shout out to all of the students and teachers that are watching tonight, and thank you for keeping it classy. Those are my thoughts. Mr. Superintendent, you need some action on this item. You're muted, Dr. James.
There we go. So yeah, would like to have a board concurrence that this is the route that we should go right now.
So I'd ask if there is one. I would entertain a motion for approval of the blended plus, or the remote plus option that was presented this evening.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion from Dr. Hall, a second from Ms. Autry. Are there any final comments, questions, or discussion? Hearing and seeing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Bravo,
Yes.
Dr. Hall,
Aye.
Mrs. Mansfield,
Yes.
Mrs. McKittrick,
Yes.
Dr. Akbar,
Yes.
Mr. Alexander,
Yes.
Ms. Autry.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And again, as everyone else so eloquently put it, to Ms. Shipe, to Dr. Ellen McWilliams-Woods, to Dr. James, and Mr. Pendleton, all of your teams, thank you so much. Please pass along and express our thanks for all of the work that they're putting into this. And as Dr. McWilliams-Woods said, the work isn't over yet. So I'm sure we'll be hearing from the teams again, but thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Because we still have other items on the agenda, there's no report from me. Mr. Pendleton, Treasurer's report.
No report.
Thank you. Committee reports, legal contracts, and board policy.
No report.
Thank you. Finance and capital management.
Yes, just briefly, I will share the Finance Committee met on the 19th. And I'll just be sharing a few legislative updates. We did discuss the House Bill 305, which is the Fair School Funding Act, which has been taking a lot of twists and turns since COVID, of course. And I believe this past Wednesday, it was to be introduced as a Senate bill. So we were just waiting on the next steps after that, which would include some simulations, hopefully by election time. Also, Senate Bill 350, we briefly discussed, which has heard testimony from our Akron Public Schools and other districts, and that is the bill regarding us having to depend solely on yellow buses for transportation. And then we discussed as well Ed Choice vouchers, which right now there's no action being taken on that. And if that continues, we will potentially explode from 500 schools to over 1,200 buildings in Ohio if no work takes place on that. So we're kind of standing by and keeping our eyes on that particular thing right now. So that's all that I have as far as legislative updates from the Finance Committee.
Yeah, and then I'll pick it up from there. Thanks, Ms. Autry. So we also, I mean, really the main thing that I want to focus on is that we set a date for our state, our state of the state school finances, if you will, right, for December 7th, 2020. And there are sort of the overarching theme of that state of the school finances sort of committee meeting is really around financial clarity, which would include discussion of the levy as well as some of our other financial needs, and also using this summit to really kind of talk about, for example, a couple of different items. One would be to utilize that forum to ensure that the public is informed and that we are able to sort of address what I would term at times erroneous assumptions that the public may have. One of which, being that, part of our rationale in not returning kids to school was to save money for the district, which could not be further from the truth, right? And so, so I think part of that too is also sort of outlining, because we are stewards of the district's money, sort of outlining not just that, but also outlining what the cost of returning to school in person, due to COVID-19 would look like when we eventually go back, right? Sort of walking through those variables. I know that, from a saving standpoint, our buildings haven't been in use. So things like utilities, I think, as Ms. Autry pointed out, have been much reduced, and so of course those things will return full steam once our kids return to school. I know we've also talked about the fact that there are some kids falling behind, and it's part of the reason why we had that lengthy conversation tonight about this intervention model. So at some point, there's going to have to be a conversation about whether it's a possible summer sort of third term, if you will, and kind of address the costs of remedial tutoring for our students that may have fallen behind, and then sort of have conversations around sort of what a possible summer school model might look like in an expanded version, and sort of what those costs would be. And how do we resource that appropriately? We also, I think Ms. Autry also brought up, about I think she asked whether the district would continue to maintain the Wi-Fi and the hotspots for the families once students return. Because I think our understanding was that the grants that have been supporting that would no longer be available. And so I know that I think Dr. James has said that there have been some discussion amongst the city and the chamber regarding Wi-Fi. We also, along with Mr. Pendleton, reviewed the draft racial equity policy, and we talked about how that policy interacts with existing APS policies. So I know senior staff is currently reviewing all of the policies and is going to provide feedback through the legal and policy committee. And then kind of the last bucket of items that we talked about was sort of more broadly described as equity and transparency in spending. And so we've talked about doing that sort of unit level analysis. And so specifically, we talked a lot about the I Promise school funding. Now obviously the I Promise school is a public school, and while it receives the same funding as other schools, the LeBron James Family Foundation does provide additional services, substantial services that allow for class reductions and the providing of wraparound services. And so I think, one of the questions that I know that I'd asked was trying to dial down and figure out, well, what does the per pupil spend look like at the I Promise school as compared to other schools, right? Because we talk a lot about, equity and what kinds of resources are necessary to really provide for students that are challenge performers, right? So kids that would fall in the sort of bottom 25%, from maybe a language arts or mathematics standpoint, and so what are the real costs, to provide the kind of services that we'd want to provide to our neediest students, and kind of using the I Promise school as kind of a model, if you will, that we can kind of learn from and think about what kinds of services, can we sort of extrapolate out and apply to the rest of the district, and thinking through how that gets paid for. Anyway, so those were that's kind of a what I hoped was a brief interview, and kind of talked again through how through the Forecast 5 tool and how that could assist with answering some of those questions in the future. But there's candidly there's a lot of work yet to be done. But we're fortunate, Ms. Autry and I and Mr. President, we have a good group of people that are engaged and passionate about doing that work. So that's the finance update.
Thank you so much. Instructional policy and student achievement.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a quick but important update on the middle school, college, and career academy master planning work. As the board knows, we had 100 staff, students, families, and community members working for 6 months last year to design the 5-year master plan that would transform our middle schools to support our college and career academies. Originally, we were going to present this plan to the board last spring, but of course, the coronavirus sort of blew that up. And so now we're coming to you with that plan. So we have a timeline to share with you. You got an email about a special board meeting where we will devote that time solely to the College and Career Academy Master Plan for the middle school. And then the budget will be reviewed by the Finance Committee at their scheduled meeting on Monday, November 23rd. And finally, we'll bring the master plan for final consideration to the board on November 30th. So make sure that you have a look at the board docs for the updates for the Family Resource Centers, the I Promise School, and the College and Career Academies. And that's all we have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Under unfinished business, we need to continue our discussion around the superintendent search. And if the board will recall, and also for the benefit of the public, as many of you already know, our superintendent has tendered his letter of retirement effective July 1st, 2021. With his last day being June 30th, 2021. To that end, this board is looking at making one of the most significant decisions it will make this year, believe it or not, in selecting a new superintendent this school year. We've got a lot going on, and this certainly adds to the mix of difficult decisions that we must make. In speaking to the superintendent, assistant superintendent, the treasurer, some former board members and presidents, we collected the names of a few search firms in particular that are known throughout the state of Ohio for their ability to conduct those types of searches and for their experience and expertise in doing so. We narrowed those down. One firm opted not to submit a proposal. We heard presentations from the other two firms, and we forwarded those proposals to the board prior to those presentations so that our board had an opportunity to review those. We heard from both of those search firms at our last meeting. We gave the board an opportunity to forward me any questions or comments or thoughts that they had around the proposals. And tonight, under our new business section, we do have the form that the decision will come in as a business affairs supplemental item number 1. And if you'll notice under that section, which is section 30.1 under new business on your agenda, you will find the information. And what we're looking at now is the two search firms that we heard presentations from. And in the interest of full disclosure and for the public, the board had no additional questions or comments that were sent to me, and so therefore I didn't send anything additional to those search firms. These two options in front of you tonight. One of them would be to hire the Ohio School Boards Association in an amount not to exceed $15,000. The other would be to hire K-12 Business Consulting, Inc. in an amount not to exceed $22,500. Those amounts were based on the amounts in their proposal and adding some additional $5,000 additional each to take care of the things that were supplemental to those proposals that would be necessary at some point, but were not included in the base price. And for example, that would be advertising costs and travel for any of the finalist candidates. So at this time, I'd like to open it up for comments, questions, discussion on the superintendent search itself. And then as we wrap up this discussion, we'll be entertaining a motion for either option 1, which is OSBA, or option 2, which is K-12 Business Consulting, Inc. So at this point, if anyone would like to start with any comments, questions, or discussion, I'd be open to that. And then if everyone else would line up in the chat if you have some. Dr. Hall.
Yeah, I just had one question. Are we making a decision? I mean, so I was thinking through the cost proposals. I know that I had asked a question, maybe others had as well last time around, their ability to do a national search as well if we so desired. We aren't making that decision tonight, right? We're just making a decision as to which vendor we choose.
Correct. They both have the capability to do a national search. And both of those would be an additional charge. So at some point, if we decided we wanted to expand that, for example, one of them was an additional charge of about $4,500. Mm-hmm. So at that point, between that and any additional advertising costs and travel, we would have to come back and increase that not to exceed amount if we chose to go that way.
Okay.
Thank you for that question. Anyone?
Thank you.
Ms. Mansfield?
Just want to thank both groups for coming out. You know, it's hard enough to give a pitch to a board in person and try to make a good stand, but man, doing it on Zoom and trying to handle all of us, has got to be a yeoman's job there. So they really held their own. You know, when we did the search for Mr. Pendleton, we went with the K-12 essentially, and I really enjoyed their presentation. But just to lay cards on the table, I felt like this time around, I think I'd kind of like to throw my support in, on behalf of OSBA. I thought that their presentation was very thoughtful and sounded like a direction that we would like to go. I also want to make sure that when we're considering this, that we don't forget as a board what strong folks we have here in our district. So I want to make sure that they are given full opportunity to be considered. And it would be my hope that whoever we do bring in to do this search understands very strongly how committed we are to our senior staff and to our to those folks that have been with us for a very long time. I know that in some cases, superintendents like to bring in their own people and things like that. I think that there's a reason people come to Akron and stay in Akron for their careers. And so just want to put that out there and go from there. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ms. Mansfield. Mr. Alexander?
Yes, I think both firms did a very good job of presenting their information to us. I like the first group to a certain extent because they brought us Mr. Pendleton, And that was a big plus for us here in Akron Public Schools, because we could have lost him and he could have been doing his great work somewhere else. And I like that they brought him in, and we got to keep him here. And saying that too, but I do like Ohio School Board Association. The difference between the two for me, it seemed like OSBA has done more searches when they've done with more bigger school districts, whereas K-12 they did more smaller school districts. When we talked about urban versus suburban, OSBA did more urban school districts, and they have done more, to me, searches outside of just the state of Ohio. And so if we're talking about doing a nationwide search or a national search, then they seem to have the experience of doing that. And so I am kind of with Lisa. I'm leaning towards OSBA because of their experience and the history that they have as well. Long-standing history of working with schools and getting superintendents. So I like both presentations, and both were really good. But those are a couple of things that stood out to me: the larger school districts and dealing with urban school districts. And I think they were K-12 were looking more at, to me, they were helping more school districts that were smaller, and we're a bigger school district, and we need somebody who understands this, a larger school district. So I'm going with OSBA. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. Anyone else before I come back around? Ms. Autry?
Yes, thank you. So I appreciated both presentations as well. And I will be leaning more towards the Ohio School Board Association. I just really like the fact that they are experienced in working with urban districts that are similar to ours. I also like the optional communication workshop that he discussed, and that also the board members would have a portal throughout this process to help keep us up to speed on things. So I appreciated that as a new school board member. So I think he mentioned Mount Healthy, which is a district in Cincinnati, and I know that they are similar in makeup to us. So I think that's important to have someone that is familiar with a district such as ours or similar demographics. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Autry. Anyone else? Dr. Hall, go ahead.
Yeah, I just had two quick questions. One was from Ms. Mansfield. Obviously, I wasn't here when we used K-12 to find Mr. Pendleton. And while I, maybe leaning towards OSBA, I do think it needs to be asked. If we had a good experience with them the last time, and we like the person they got, and that person's still with us, I have to ask what may be the obvious question, which is, why wouldn't we choose them again for the superintendent search? That's my question. Then I have a comment. And then my comment is sort of related to what Ms. Mansfield was getting at earlier about wanting to make sure that we give folks that are here ample opportunity to apply or be considered. I think that's what she was trying to say or said. And I would welcome that. I think I know I'm not quite a year on this board, but in my time there are probably multiple people that will be qualified to apply for that position, and I hope that they all do. So because want to make sure that we give proper deference and respect to the in-house qualified candidates as well. So anyway, so that was my comment. But just would like to hear, and Mr. Bravo, Mr. Alexander, you guys can weigh in on this as well, but just would like to hear, and the answer might be really simple, but just would kind of like to hear if we're so content with how they did the first time, why would we chance going with someone that we don't have any experience working with, regardless of how good the presentation was, we don't have any experience working with OSBA, to my knowledge, in getting treasurer and or superintendent candidates.
So, full disclosure, I kind of pushed Mr. Bravo to take a look at bringing in K-12, because I was like, hey, same reason you just said, really liked what they did with Ryan, wouldn't trade Ryan for anything. Can we maybe have them come in and present too? And so I was kind of rooting for him. So to me, it just came down to that day. And because we have a relationship with OSBA through our association, and, you know, over the years, you get to know the reputation from other board members across the district or across the state, I believe. So I think that to me, that's beyond just the presentation on one given night or whatever, or their even paperwork or things like that. Some of it's word of mouth from other board members over the course of 12 years. And honestly, I don't remember at this point what tipped the scales in favor of the other organization the last time. I know that it was unanimous with the board, and we liked the result. So, yeah.
Yeah, and then Dr. Hall, we have actually worked with OSBA before. In fact, that's who conducted the search when Dr. James was hired. So the board throughout its history has used different folks at different times, and certainly OSBA, the Ohio School Boards Association, is at the top of that list. Similarly, OSB or OASBO, the Ohio Association of School Business Officials, was actually who we worked with and contracted with when we did the treasurer search, because that is the official trade association with the treasurers too. And so there was something to be said for that organization, working with that organization when that is who works with the treasurers. And certainly with the School Boards Association, intuitively, it seems a little more like they would be in tune to boards who are searching more for superintendents. The Buckeye Association of School Administrators does not do superintendent or treasurer search. And in fact, what we found out this time when we actually reached out and to OASBO, the Ohio Association of School Business Officials, is I kind of learned and things were cleared up for us a little bit. That's who we worked with last time, but they subcontracted to K-12. So when we reached out to K-12 this time and went straight to K-12, because OASBO as an organization doesn't do superintendent searches. They do treasurer searches, but they also subcontract that work to a few different groups. So anyway, they, as Lisa said, for me last time, they certainly tipped the scales in terms of their presentation, and it could be just the day and the time and the way the presentation was done. They also had the added benefit of being at what I thought at the time and what we were going for was folks that work more with treasurers. This time for me, if we're putting the cards on the table, I was a little more compelled by the OSBA search. I was also a little more compelled by the technology that's in place for OSBA. The cost is a little bit more effective in terms of a $10,500 cost versus a $17,500 base cost, when they both, for the most part, are going to do the same thing. In my opinion, and I'll wrap up there, I don't think we would go wrong with either of them. When we talk to the staff here within our district, folks from elsewhere, former board members, a few names kept popping up on the list, and these were two of them. So I don't think you're going to go wrong with either.
Yeah, I don't think we'll go wrong with. Yeah, I don't think we'll go wrong with either of them either. But I when we talk to, as Patrick said, when we talk about treasurer, then OASBO was the one who actually came and did the most of the talking to us, and then they contracted out. They were the ones who came to Akron to talk to us to say, hey, here's what we're doing. So they got K-12 to look for it. And they did more of a treasurer search. Now we're looking for a superintendent search, which is totally different. So for me, I went with OSBA because I know their history. I've been involved with OSBA currently as the treasurer, but also even beforehand working with some individuals from there. And so I know what they can bring. And I like Patrick said too, I mean, we're going to get probably a good bang for our buck, and probably even we add that little extra money, we're still going to come out on a good end. And I do Mr. Horton, who and I know him, and I know he would do a good job for us. So that's why I lean towards them, because of they have the background in doing superintendent searches, and not just superintendent searches for just a particular group, but a number, and their history, the years. If we listen to what the years of service they've been involved in doing superintendent searches, there's a long history of doing superintendent searches across the board. So that's why I kind of lean towards OSBA.
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
Yes. So first, I want to thank both companies for presenting to us, as well as taking the time to meet with Mr. Bravo and myself prior to coming to the board. And those conversations, I think, really gave us a good idea of what they can do. With that being said, I think that it sounds like most people have stated that the efficiency that will be provided by OSBA, as well as their experience, might outweigh K-12 right now, considering them. I'll also just go ahead and say one of the things that I noticed that we didn't really talk about, but Mr. Bravo mentioned, was the technology. I think that that's going to be critical for the land that we are navigating today, as well as the landscape. The last thing I'll say is it'll allow us all to be able to review all candidates throughout the entire process, instead of being told who to select. So I think that that will allow us the most flexibility with technology, with experience, with the size of our district, as well as what we requested from each of those organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Akbar. Anyone else? If not, as we look to entertain a motion, I just want to echo the sentiments of our board and thank both organizations, K-12 Business Consulting, Inc. and OSBA, the Ohio School Boards Association, for coming out and presenting to us. As Ms. Mansfield said, it's difficult to do in the best of times, and we certainly appreciate them making accommodations and joining us virtually to do that presentation. We think very highly of both organizations, and again, having worked with both in the past, we know that we're going to get a good result either way. So hats off to both organizations, and thank you for participating. We'll entertain a motion for either option 1, OSBA, or option 2, K-12, and both options are in your board packet.
I'll make a motion that we approve Ohio School Boards Association to do our superintendent search.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion from Ms. McKittrick, a second from Mr. Alexander for option 1 on business affairs recommendation supplement number 1. Are there any comments, final comments, questions, or discussion? Hearing and seeing none, roll call, please.
Dr. Hall,
Aye.
Mrs. Mansfield,
Yes.
Mrs. McKittrick,
Yes.
Dr. Akbar,
Yes.
Mr. Alexander,
Yes.
Ms. Autry,
Yes.
Mr. Bravo.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you to the board for that. Appreciate it. We, Dr. Akbar and I will get together and we'll start working with OSBA, and we'll get a calendar and an update to you on timeline and next steps. With that, Mr. Pendleton, you have item 30.2, teacher supply allowance.
Yes, thank you. Let me walk through this briefly and see if there's any questions before I ask for your approval. During negotiations last year, one of the items that we were trying to clean up for the teacher supply allowance for elementary teachers is a very lengthy and cumbersome reimbursement process. And it is a reimbursement process. So lots of receipts were collected, buildings would tape receipts, and there'd be a long lead time to a reimbursement. And that led to the district of hundreds and hundreds of transactions and a lot of different individuals. So during negotiations, we went back and forth and said that we wanted to settle somewhere where the teachers would land around $150 for this teacher reimbursement. Well-intentioned, the execution of it didn't go as I would have liked. We did just issue it. We received guidance from state teachers retirement system that this was pensionable. So it took an additional 30+% out of the stipend. After a series of back and forth with the STRS, they did change their perspective on that. Unfortunately, the teacher stipend allowance was already issued. And so we're going to be issuing some corrections, and unfortunately it's going to, teachers don't have to do anything as it relates to this. We're just going to have to issue some corrections in the next pay. But I would like permission to honor the intent of this and make up the difference. On average, each teacher was short to the net of $150 by about $30. So I'd like to honor the intent of that language, issue this, and then meet with the teachers union for next year to work on a mechanism, possibly through accounts payable, that will still get reported as income, but at $170 with an average income tax rate of between 20 and 30%. That should come out much closer to it. And then again, back to our intent of making it a lot easier for teachers to receive this supply allowance. And also, if we do it through accounts payable next year, if that's the best means, we can have the turnaround time sooner in the school year than in October. October is when we can get it through the payroll system once the 3-week shuffle and teachers are in their final assignment. So with that, I'd like to recommend resolution 20-149.
Thank you. And board members, you have resolution 20-149 under item 30.2 in your board packet. We'll open it up for any questions or comments if anybody has any.
Mr. Bravo, I'll just make a quick comment. I want to thank Mr. Pendleton for his quick action on this. I started getting messages really quick as soon as teachers got notice of what their pay was, and no sooner did I have him on the phone than he had drafted an email and was going to send it out to all the staff because there was a lot of upset. So big thanks to him for that and for his quick action. And, it was nothing intentional. Like you said, it was with all of the best intentions. So just big thanks for straightening that out so quickly.
Thanks for the heads up.
Thank you. Anyone else? Hearing and seeing none, we'll entertain a motion for approval of resolution 20-149 to pay a portion of the teacher allowance through accounts payable.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion from Ms. Mansfield, a second from Ms. Autry. Any final comments, questions, or discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Mrs. Mansfield,
Yes.
Mrs. McKittrick,
Yes.
Dr. Akbar,
Yes.
Mr. Alexander,
Yes.
Ms. Autry,
Yes.
Mr. Bravo,
Yes.
Dr. Hall.
Aye.
Thank you.
And pursuant to section 121.22G1 of the Ohio Revised Code, to consider the compensation and or employment of personnel or public officials of the district, we do have a need to enter into executive session. So at this time, I'll entertain a motion for a recess into executive session.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Ms. McKittrick, a second by Mr. Alexander. Roll call, please.
Mrs. McKittrick,
Yes.
Dr. Akbar,
Yes.
Mr. Alexander,
Yes.
Ms. Autry,
Yes.
Mr. Bravo,
Yes.
Dr. Hall,
Aye.
Mrs. Mansfield.
Yes.
Thank you.
So we are going to all exit out of this meeting. We'll see you in executive session. And for the public, we will be returning in just a few moments. And we do have 2 items for consideration upon our return. Thank you. Thank you. Good evening and welcome back to the regular meeting for the Akron Public Schools Board of Education for Monday, October 26th, 2020. We've just returned from executive session. We do have 2 items for consideration. They're both in your board packet. Items 32.1, a resolution 20-150, approving a memorandum of understanding between the Akron Board of Education and the Akron Education Association regarding OTES 2.0 contract language and walkthrough form. And item 32.2, which is resolution 20-151, a resolution to approve a memorandum of understanding between the Akron Board of Education and the Akron Education Association regarding the exemption of student growth measures for the 2020-2021 educator evaluations. On item 32.1, we'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion from Ms. McKittrick, a second from Dr. Akbar. Any comments, questions, or discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Alexander, Mr. Alexander, can you hear us?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Ms. Autry,
Yes.
Mr. Bravo,
Yes.
Dr. Hall,
Aye.
Hear you. I can hear you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Mrs. McKittrick,
Yes.
Dr. Akbar.
Yes.
You know, with the exception of me being dropped from the meeting at some point, we almost made it through this whole night. For item 32.2, we'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. A motion from Ms. Mansfield, a second from Ms. McKittrick. Any comments, questions, or discussion? Hearing none.
Second.
We got a little bit of a delay,
Yeah.
Mr. Alexander.
Roll call, please.
All right, Ms. Autry,
Yes.
Mr. Bravo,
Yes.
Dr. Hall,
Aye.
Mrs. Mansfield,
Yes.
Mrs.
Can you hear me?
McKittrick,
Yes.
Dr. Akbar,
Yes.
Mr. Alexander. Wave your hand or something.
All right. Motion passes, resolution is approved. Is there any other?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Is there any other business?
Yeah.
We got a yes.
Board?
Yes.
Oh, boy. Okay. We'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved.
Thank you. We have a motion from Dr. By a second from Ms. Daughtry. We are adjourned. Thank you and have a good evening.
Good night.
Bruce will be
Good night,
out.
all.